Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 2. We are going to be assembling the fuselage, actually most of the fuselage and really most of the aircraft in this one. We're picking up straight off of episode 1, which was the assembly of the cockpit. I want to take a moment here and remind all the children, do not ever cut towards you. I use Dermasafe razor blades when I do these kind of things, when I build these aircraft or model kits in general. They are extremely sharp. They are actually razor blades, and should you want to, they are sharp enough you could shave with them. So if I do miss the part that I'm working on and I do hit my finger, it is going into my finger. So if you're playing with knives, or not playing with knives, if you're using knives out there, if you're doing this kind of thing, be extremely careful. So we're starting out with the nacelles and the inlet geometry, obviously. I didn't really like the way that this kit was set up. I don't like the half and half inlets because it can create fit issues, and this kit has quite a lot of fit issues. Actually, here this one's kind of on me, but it also will highlight down the road just a terrible fit. So the MiG-29 has inlet ramps that block off the forward-facing inlets for ground operation. So here I didn't quite seat it correctly. It's supposed to be in front of the bottom edge, and I learned later. I realized it later before the glue sets, and I'm able to fix it. You'll see it. You'll see it on the other side first, and then you'll see me come in and correct it on this one. But as I went ahead and put these together, I really realized that the geometry just isn't good in this kit for this. This is an old Monogram kit. It's just, the fit's not there. It needs to try again. But anyway, I don't like the middle seam down the inlets. It gets really hard to correct if everything's not aligned just so, and if you've got a lower quality kit, which is unfortunate because we do have one in this case. So here you can see the corrected geometry, or there you could see it very briefly, and that would be the correct way to put those ramps in. These are the engine components. Don't ever do sprues like this. If you're a company making these, please don't. They take forever to cut out. Anyway, real quick, I just want to point out that post at the top of the inlet nacelle, that is actually the correct width. So you want to glue that and push the top of the nacelle together, and that's how it is on the fuselage side. On this kind of thing where you're actually putting force to push it together, you need to glue the bottom and let it cure first. Otherwise, it's going to try and open the bottom seam as you're pushing the top together, and it just makes it messy. So here I am, kind of realizing this isn't exactly ideal of a fit, but we'll make it work. We're not going to stop. So putting together the RD33s is relatively simple. I didn't quite follow the instructions 100%. I'll get to that in a minute. The drop tank, again, fit problems. I expected this one to go a little bit easier with the fit than honestly it did, which is unfortunate, but as I said, we're going to keep going. We're not going to put the kit down just because it's not quite fitting up the way we would like to. We have the skills, we have the material, and we have the products necessary to correct this, and we'll get to that honestly in the next episode. This one did throw me, the number of fit issues that we did have. It threw me off schedule that I was aspiring towards. I'm trying to get to this weekly, but there's so many fit issues that it was taking a lot longer to try and correct all of that. So here we are putting the inlets onto the bottom half of the fuselage, or the bottom piece for the fuselage. We don't really want it moving, obviously, so masking tape is your friend. Try to wrap it as tightly as possible to pull it as close as possible. Again, the fit wasn't ideal. I think in hindsight, what I could have done is gone back and try to trim the top edge where it meets the bottom of the fuselage, and that may have sunk it just a little bit lower. But hindsight's always 20/20. We're going to be able to fix it. It's not going to be a big deal. We're not going to get discouraged by it, and we're going to keep pushing. And I'm going to keep working. So here's where I deviated from the instructions. On the RD33 parts, I went ahead and didn't attach the rear turbine. I'm not entirely sure that that's how that looks in the actual engine. I don't believe it is, but again, this is a cheaper kit. We're not going to worry about it. So I'm going to do it in Alclad to give it a metallic finish, but I was having issues with my airbrush spraying the Alclad primer. I'll show the Alclad products at the end of the video, because I think this is the first time we're using them. But I had to actually go and stop at this point and clean my airbrush, I think twice, because I had just so many issues spraying the primer. And the primer's pre-mixed, so it wasn't the primer's fault, it was definitely my airbrush. So here you can actually see the alclad going on. With the black primer, it gives a really nice finish. The shadows are there, it looks good. I think it looks good. We're still working with alclad. I'm still relatively new to it. I want to get to a bare metal finish aircraft. I do have a B-29 eventually will do, and that's one scares me to death. Because if you get the paint wrong on that, it's a very expensive, very large kit. And so we'll get there. We're still going to give it a shot, but it does make me nervous. We'll maybe do a P-38 or something a little smaller first, just to make sure we like the way it's coming out. So with the RD-33s, I'm going to spend a good amount of time on this. Camera angles are a little hard here. I'm sitting behind the camera. The parts are in front of the camera. It's a little hard to see when you're airbrushing, and I'm also airbrushing inside essentially a box, just to try and draw the fumes out because they're not good for your health. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and start the engines, the RD-33s, in black. That gives us a nice, kind of a burned, darker tinge to them. We can start with that, and then we can work our colors in if we want to. So what I typically like to do is start in black, and then I'll go grab like a bronze color. I actually have a Tester's bronze paint color that I like to use. And I'll just mist that into the nozzle section. And I think you'll see that a little bit later. And it gives it kind of more of a burn hue to it than just straight black. For the afterburner can, which is the part on the top in this orientation that you see, the non-taped part, I went ahead and sprayed some alclad again just to give it a more metallic finish. I really wanted to bring in the metallic finish there because I thought it looked closer to the actual RD-33 engines as installed on the MiG-29. But the MiG-29's had so much development, and there's so many different models of it that it's kind of hard to get one configuration, if you will. So there's a lot of pictures out there of them heat tinted. I might try that down the road. I haven't decided. That'll likely be hand painted. So it's going to require like blues and purples and all the colors that steel and titanium get when they get hot. I'm not sure what they're made out of. I wouldn't be surprised if they're titanium in real life, just because Russia and Ukraine have quite a good amount of titanium ore availability. And there we go ahead and glue in the aft turbines for the RD-33s, and that kind of completes the engine subassembly. I am breaking with the instructions steps. I am not going to install them yet, because all I would have to do is then mask off everything. But I will be pre-fitting them to make sure that there's no additional correction needed before full assembly once we're done with paint. Speaking of full assembly, here we are. We're going to join we just watched the inlets get joined up to the bottom, both side inlets this time. And here we're going to see the top and bottom fuselage sections mated. The main landing gear wheel wells do kind of get sandwiched. That actually fits okay with some gaps, but it didn't cause me any issues putting the fuselage together, which was honestly nice. It was a nice change. The nose cone did give me some issues. I wasn't able to get it as tight as I really wanted to, and the tail gave me some issues because it's almost like they weren't fully matched up top to bottom, which was really difficult to work with, really, but it did work. And once we let this sit for a while, we start to notice the fit issues. In fact, I'm going to highlight some of them right here. So on the nose, you can see there's kind of a jagged edge right there. That's going to be a problem to fill. The inlet seams are going to be difficult to work with. I'm going to go ahead and start sanding them now, and this is what threw me off schedule, actually. I was trying to start correcting them now rather than just in the immediate pre-paint step. Around the inlets, it's just atrocious. That one I ended up fixing. And then there's so many seams at the front of the inlet where the ramps are. It's a lot. There's gaps inside the inlet where the ramp is, so we're going to have to work on all of that. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. We're going to try and do it very carefully. So here you can see me correcting the left-hand inlet. I had to use a clamp to force it to the correct size. I think this is just kind kind of a consequence of the way that it's designed with that single post to justify the top width of the inlet. It kind of bows out in the front and the back. The back's held on obviously by the lower fuselage piece where it meets, but the front's kind of free floating as it just attaches at the top, and there's nothing constraining it. So as I said, we're going to go ahead and start really getting into it with the sandpaper. We're going to try and smooth out a lot of these seams early. It'll give us a better idea of what's needed before paint. The inlets definitely need a lot of attention. You can see the low spots forming as I'm sanding, the areas where it looks just like the regular plastic before being hit with sandpaper. And this is pretty aggressive sandpaper as well. I think this is 100, 120 grit, somewhere in that region. And we'll eventually come in and we'll finish it with a 400, maybe a 600 if needed. And here I'm kind of going over the original glue seam, but the glue's not quite in a position where I can sand it super well. I may try and trim it a little bit more with another razor blade and lift as much of it off as possible, and then come in and smooth it out. This MIG kit does have raised panel seams. For those of you who didn't watch my A10 video, I ranted and raved for a while about how much I dislike aircraft with raised panel seams in the kits, because go find me an aircraft that has a raised panel seam. I will happily, refute myself and eat my words if I do ever see one, but when you're butting two flat panels together or two curved panels, whatever, two panels together, there is a gap in the middle of them, and it's not usually raised unless you're putting sealant or something in. And even then you typically trim it because your aerodynamic penalties would be huge, especially on an aircraft that's supersonic. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and start filing in the nose intersection. It's really not a great geometry. I think we'll be able to correct it without too much issue, because once I did spend a while sanding it, I got it to be flat at least. It didn't fully mate up, but it was flat, and so if I get some filler in there, that should take care of that nicely. I just have to be careful not to stray too far in this angle on the left-hand side, because I believe that's where the gun is. So I don't want to mess up any of the gun detailing, and I actually want to highlight that in painting it. I want to make it look like that MiG-29 has actually been using its gun, particularly with the livery we're doing. So again, the nose cone didn't fit together quite as perfectly as we want. I'm going to take a look at that, see if I can kind of press it together a little bit more, maybe take a knife to it. So here are the instructions. We're going to deviate. We're not going into drop tank installation. We're not going into landing gear installation yet. We're not going to install any antennas, pitos, anything like that. We are purely putting the fuselage together, the wings on, the vertical tails on, and that is where we're calling it before paint. So the next episode, I would say next week, but realistically probably in 2 weeks. The next episode's going to end up being paint of the fuselage. We're going to start painting. I may just show prime. I haven't ever done the digital or the masking paint technique, or you pre-buy maskings. It's going to be a new learning curve for me. I'm excited to try it, but I haven't done it, so it may take me a little longer. It may not. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out together. So here we're putting the verticals on. The left and right hand are different, so it is important to get them right. I'm not entirely sure why, honestly. I think there's maybe a fuel vent on one side that there isn't on the other. A lot of these aircraft have their fuel vents in the vertical stabilizers. But when you're doing a twin-tail aircraft like this, or for example the F-15 or the F-14, or even the F-18. F-18 is probably the hardest, actually. You need to make sure that you're paying attention to the angles that your vertical tails are installed and held at while they cure. The A-18 is probably the harder one because they are sitting at a pretty defined or definite angle, so it's going to make it a little bit more difficult. So anyway, the kit's together now, and here you can see all the Alclad products I'm using. I'm using a primer, I'm using a chrome, and I'm using an aluminum finish, and that's giving us pretty good results so far. Alright, so that is the end of this episode. We're going to wrap it up, and hopefully next week we'll be on to, or not next week, next episode we'll be on to prime or paint, and we'll keep moving on this and keep our momentum up. Thank you, everyone.